It's been 1 year since a police officer murdered George Floyd. That horrific crime inspired a lot of conversations around the racial reckoning in America. Our guest tonight has been leading a conversation from a unique perspective as a Black Indian. That's the name of her award winning memoir, and I'm so honored to introduce to you Shonda Buchanan. Welcome to the Goddess Power Show, where I interview trailblazing women who share their perspectives and help us all live bigger, better, and bolder. I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and that's my mission to empower all of us and to especially inspire conversations that can cause change for the good and create harmony, justice, and equality. So, Shonda, welcome.
Thank you so very much for having me, Elizabeth. I am incredibly grateful and honored and humbled to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love your book, Black Indian, a memoir. Can you talk? Yes, it's just beautiful. And
Yes.
look at that
Thank
peaceful
you.
picture. Yes. You also have a book called Poems from Goddess Country. So I'm loving that too.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is my first book of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians?
Mm,
That led
beautiful.
the conversation and the writing to my memoir, Black Indian.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So I would love, Shonda, to open up
Mhm.
talking about your reflections about the past year that was
Yeah.
inspired by such a horrific moment.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I want to just give pause. One of the things that we do in my communities, both, the African American and the American Indian, is to give pause, a moment of pause to honor the spirit of the fallen.
Mm,
And in particular, George Floyd today. And as he is now kind of, I don't want to say replaced, but maybe usurped the Trayvon Martin discussion about what it means to be a Black person in America and brutalized by someone else who is not of your race. So I'm just going to pause in this in a moment, of reflection for the spirit of George Floyd, prayers for his family.
mm,
Mhm. Thank you. Because we have to hold space for them. We have to hold space for the fallen soldiers who come to represent what has happened to us as Black people in America. And I think this year, from the moment it happened last year, sparking the fuse, lighting the fire for the injustice and the continued brutality on the bodies of Black men and women and children. And I think we as African Americans and our allies, I have to say as well, we have pushed that discussion and we pushed the conversation of what it means to include of color people in all realms of our society. So what it means to appoint them to boards, what it means to include them in discussions about education, how art, literature, painting, music, not only informs us, or it's not only the thing that we can do well, but it is the thing that provides us with a sense of resilience, right?
mm,
Our voices are important. I
mhm,
think since for the last year, I think that people are understanding we already know our voices are important. No one has to tell African Americans or American Indians or mixed bloods
mhm,
that you matter. No one has to tell us that. But
mhm,
it's that dominant society that we have to show them. It's like, we're here and we're not going away. So I think that the
mm,
last year has been a lot about really looking more what it means to do diversity, what it means to do inclusivity, what
mm,
equity actually looks like.
mhm, mhm. Wow, that's powerful. And
Yeah.
your book, which is now in its second printing,
Yes.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited. Thank you, Wayne State.
Oh, Wayne State in Detroit.
Wayne State University Press. Yeah, they
Mhm.
published
Oh,
my memoir.
wonderful. And you're in
Yeah.
Los Angeles and I'm in Detroit. So that's powerful,
Yeah.
Shonda. So
Yeah.
your book, you are using
Mhm.
writing as a tool to inspire dialogue that can
Yeah.
educate, instruct. Can you talk about the power of writing to do that through your book?
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe, well, I'll start first with a couple of the themes in my memoir, Black Indian. It explores the themes of selfhood, it explores
Mm.
the themes of family and family violence, it explores the themes of survival, institutional racism. Of course, that's actually a major theme in my book because I look at how my family represented and enacted the trauma of the country in our interactions with each other. So
Oh,
so you know what I mean. So
I
being
do,
a
but I'm
oh
sorry. Can you give an example
oh
so people,
absolutely.
I know what you're saying, but for those who don't,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So for the mixed bloods, and I'll talk a little bit about how they came together. So American Indians who met African Americans either as slave or as free people of color, African Americans who married into the American Indian tribes, or African Americans who were enslaved by American Indian tribes. Those are a couple of different kinds of intersections. And a lot of people don't think about how those intersections happened. Not only they weren't black people were not only the slaves of the five civilized tribes, they were also wives. They were also a part of the nations, a part of those tribes. So for my people, and I'll talk about my manuals, my Staffords, who came from North Carolina, Sampson County, North Carolina, Hertford, North Carolina, and parts of Virginia. My people were already mixed. They were, our lore, our family lore is that we have a full blood, on the Roberts side, actually, we have a full blood American Indian woman who married a full blood African man. And that African man this is so full blood African man, but then there's also the rumor that that African man was the child of an English man and a black woman, a black slave. So that family begat. And then when they owned their land, they actually owned over 700 acres of land in North Carolina. But then what happened? They were free people of color, they were mixed bloods, and suddenly the white encroaching society or white society said, you know what? We kind of think we would like your land. And you're free people of color, but we would like your land. And so there became all of these restrictions, not only on my family, but other free blacks, free people of color, free mulattoes as well. So they would call them free blacks, free people of color, free mulattoes, so that um, the labels were interchanging. And when white people wanted something, they had ways of getting it in this early 17 and the early 1800s. And so it would be restrictions by code, by law. It could be threats. You know, they could actually threaten you. They could do many things that they weren't punished for. This harkens back to George Floyd, and it harkens back to Trayvon Martin. This harkens back to Breonna Taylor, right? It's kind of that sense of because of our connection to an enslavement past, anything can happen to the Black body. Policing happens to the Black body. That has happened on multiple occasions, of course, in the form of Jim Crow and KKK members, right? That
Hmm.
terrorism that has happened.
Hmm.
But for my family, and what I talk about is how we somehow that seed was planted in us, and we fought each other. You know, my family just had at a certain point there was a sense of we did not know who we were. We knew that we were Black. We knew that we were American Indian as well. And in my family, we say Indian, and we knew we had some white in us. But where did it come from? We
Mm.
really didn't know our identity. And so
Mm.
Black Indian, my book set me on that path of recovery, uncovering my ancestors' trails, recovering what happened to them, recovering their lives. How many children they had. I'm just amazed that one of my predecessors had 15 children from one body, then a 13 children. You know, the women, had multiple children. And so my memoir definitely talks a lot about what that means to be a mixed blood person in this country who has to continually reclaim your sense of identity, your sense of self, your selfhood, reclaim your autonomy. And sometimes for a couple of my ancestors, I will say, one of my manuals, he passed. He disappeared into white society because he was light skinned enough And then there were others who said, no, I'm going to stay. I'll just be mulatto. You know, I'm just going to stay over here and I'm going to work my farm and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
raise my children to the best of my ability. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. That region of the country is so fascinating,
The
Shonda. And you mentioned
Midwest. Yeah.
and Virginia and the Carolinas. And Virginia was the hub.
Yeah.
Richmond was the slave trade hub for a time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I, being a mixed race woman who sometimes people think I'm white, I wrote a book called Dark Secret about a
Yeah.
woman passing for white and exploring that concept, like the movie Imitation of Life. And I visited Virginia and I visited to do
Mm.
research. I visited plantations, and a lot of the tourists around me were like, oh, this is so beautiful, and these big
Yeah.
houses and the land
Yeah.
and on the James River. And my skin was crawling because I had this, I could feel the spirits of the horrific things that had
Yeah.
occurred there, and the
Yeah.
oppression and the
Yeah.
brutality. And so I'm so glad that these conversations are coming
Mm.
out. And for you,
Mm-hmm.
as a Black Indian,
Yeah.
talking, because if we know the truth about what happened to Native Americans, and many
Mm-hmm.
people don't really know the
Yeah.
true extent of the
Yeah.
brutality,
Yeah. Yeah.
millions slaughtered,
Yeah.
millions,
Yeah.
millions, horrific.
There
And
were
so,
over 500 Indian nations before colonization, before the settlers came and just decimated the tribes with not just the smallpox blankets, but you know, with murder and with removal and just other kinds of illnesses. So yes, there were millions and millions of American Indians across this country, and now in terms of the numbers, I would have to look. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but the Indian nations probably, but maybe in the hundreds, but maybe over 100, some odd recognized nations, as opposed to those who federally recognized, as opposed to some of those who are state recognized.
so Shonda, I love how you describe how in the South, especially, you can
Mm.
feel the energy, the
Yeah.
trauma, the sadness, the spirits. Can you talk about that? How that's lingering and it's coming to the
Yeah.
surface now?
Yeah. I actually have a poem in one of my books that talks about visiting the Berkeley Plantation in in Virginia. And can I read just a line from it or
Please.
a couple of lines? So,
Absolutely.
so this is the Berkeley Plantation is where supposedly they call it the first Thanksgiving happened in 1619. And when I visited Berkeley Plantation, like you, I felt the ghosts. I felt that heat permeating my skin. I like could sense that sense of sorrow, the suffering that happened on this plantation. And then I read the sign that says, and this is where the first Thanksgiving happened. And of course, we're thinking, Thanksgiving for who? So, for whom?
Mm.
So, one of the things that I say in here is the hallway is wide, decent rooms, cardboard smell, stately portraits above mantles, white faces, chipped porcelain and china, things black hands have cleaned. So, and I go on to talk about, yeah, what that means to be walking through a plantation, one of those mansions, and it's like our presence as American Indians and African Americans, it's in the periphery, it's in the margins, it's in the dust, like the dust. You know, we cleaned everything in that house, but there's no representation of us until an interpreter comes and then sometimes says what they say is, and the slaves lived over there, or Mary, what is Jefferson's wife? I forget his wife's name, but her slave is how Sally Hemings did this, and her
Mhm.
slave, her slave, her slave. And when you call someone slave, you are giving them their identity. And so, for a lot of the things that I do as a language person, as a writer, is I try to disrupt some of those terms. So I don't say slave, I say enslaved, because that is a person who had an atrocity or a condition put upon them.
Mm.
I've also stopped singing as a professor as well. I teach at Loyola Marymount University. I've been teaching university level for almost, gosh, 20 years now. But I tell my students, why are you saying that it's a dark day? or that you feel like, a dark feeling. I, because dark connotes black, and black connotes who we are right now. So why don't you just say, I feel bad, or I feel worse, or there are different ways to talk about a feeling of an ominous feeling,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to connecting with dark. So that
Yes.
always tings my writer's ear and tings my activist ear.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to disrupt that with language. And I do that in both Black Indian and also in my book of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians? Um, yeah, so that sense of Virginia and North Carolina heritage and inheritance, and the sense of being on the migration trail, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what happened to my family. We were
Mm.
forced from North Carolina, from our lands, forced to sell them, left North Carolina, went into Kentucky. Kentucky was not friendly. Went to Tennessee. Tennessee worse to of color people. Even the crossing into the Ohio landscape, even though that technically was still American Indian territory, white people had set these perimeters so that if you were an of color person crossing into the Ohio territory, you had to pay a tithe on yourself. You had to pay a tithe on yourself and your family. And then
Mm.
to even enter. And I'm not sure about the leaving, but the entering I know. And you can Google that. Anyone can Google that. So for my family, we went to Indiana, where we started some of the first free people of color settlements in Randolph County, in Hamilton, and Rush, and Nettle Creek in Indiana. And
Mm-hmm.
then one of my predecessors, Willis Roberts Jr., went to Michigan, and then he bought land in Michigan, in the Michigan area, where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in Kalamazoo.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so my people moved into Michigan, and they're some of the first free people of color to settle the Michigan area as well.
Wow.
Southwest Michigan. Yeah.
Right. And what year was that?
Oh my gosh. So 1854, in the 1854 census, there were 54 free people of color families listed, and so they were coming before that. In Indiana, my one of my Stafford predecessors, born in 1730, so that means he got there about 1740, somewhere around there, 1740, 1750. So yeah, between the 1740s and 50s up into the 1800s, that's where my people were just working the land and clearing the land and trading with Quakers and, trying to eke a living out of that swampland.
Eke a living out of that swampland. And the Civil War hadn't even happened yet. So
Yeah.
slavery
Yeah.
was still occurring.
Yep.
Shonda, I'm absolutely fascinated by your languaging and teaching people to
Mm,
relanguage all these images and feelings. Can you share a few more examples about how we can change our
yes.
language?
Yeah, I actually I can, because, and I think this is a bit of a prominent discussion now, where we talk about uh, travesty of enslavement, or brutality of white slave masters, and um, uh, the onslaught of the KKK. So those are like three kind of words that we language, or we apply to the public narrative. But if we think about what happened to of color people and American Indians as terrorism,
Mm. Yes, yes, it was straight up terrorism. Mhm.
straight up terrorism, like, and then you can look at the root word of terror, and instilling like deadly, deathly fear in another person.
Mhm.
That was the interior and the exterior of the lives of people of color, African Americans in particular, for the enslavement African Americans, right? For generations. And I believe, and I feel, and I know that it's been proven that we carry that terror in our bodies.
Mhm.
We carry that terror in our
Mhm.
language. We
Mhm.
carry that sense of the terror. We some might say the lack of inferiority, or the feeling of being inferior, but it's fear. you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's fear of what the repercussions of what happened. So that's what I mean when I talk about languaging. It's like, let's call it what it is, you know, or as a poet, as a writer, what we do is we pull back the onion skin and we're like, let's smell the interior of the onion. Let's make it bold and pungent and poignant. And you know, let's call it what it is. Let's cry, you know, with the actual meaning of what this means in our country. And then we can mend, you know, and then we can relanguage our existence. Then we can demand that our education books, history books in school, our English books, you know, then we can talk about how do we represent a people who have contributed everything that they had to the building and the foundation of this country. We
Mm-hmm.
always say this country was built on the backs of African Americans. It
Mm-hmm.
was, you know,
Yes.
and those American Indians who were enslaved as well. And of course on top of their country, because this is all Indian country,
Mm-hmm.
right? But how do we take that relabeling or the relanguaging, and how do we make that something that becomes a tool of empowerment, right? um, on the other end of it, a lot of people will talk about the N word and how they have had to reclaim the N word in order to disempower it for white people using it. But I
Mm-hmm.
will say, I heard an interview with Paul Mooney, rest in peace, you know, for Paul Mooney, and I heard this interview last week, and he said that he used to use that word indiscriminately, just, you know, the in this, in that. He said it's not going away. And then he heard a white comedian use that word, and he thought that it was his fault, and he stopped using the N word. Yes. And he was like, he said, I was floored, just floored and flabbergasted that a white comedian felt authority in the use of that word. And he said, I felt like I was at fault, so I stopped
Mm.
using it. You know, in the interview, this is what I heard: is he was like, so I stopped using it in that way, in that manner.
Wow, that's so powerful. And musicians have that responsibility because when they put
Yeah,
out music with such a great beat and lyrics, and then that
yeah.
word is in there, and then white teenagers drive around singing it with their music
Asian
blasting.
teenagers, yeah, Asian teenagers as well, and Latina, you know, Latinx teenagers, and everyone is, you know, is kind of taking that word and saying, oh, this is what it means for me, and this is what it means. But the heritage and the history of that word is unshakable. It ultimately comes from what happened to us pre-Middle Passage, the raping of Africa. Take it back to history, you know, and if you take that back to history, we would hopefully think about using that word differently in relation to ourselves, our children, our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Not use it at all.
Yeah, not use it at all. Yeah,
So, Shonda, there are all these wonderful conversations happening, thankfully, to
yeah.
cultivate healing and understanding and unity. However, at the same time, there's this faction that is just so
Mm,
going in the other direction, including some leadership in our country. So, how do we reconcile that? How do we
mm,
continue to make this racial and progress
mhm.
while there's this other faction that seems to be getting louder and stronger?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I'm so glad that you asked me how to do this. One of the things as a professor, I'm a writer, so I'm a creative person, but I'm also one of those left brain thinker people who can write a report to change the paradigm of something. I was at a certain point, I was an ethnographic evaluation assistant, and I learned like charts, and I learned things like indices and ethnographic evaluation, and just, you know, many things. So what I see on the national scale of how we're trying to move towards the sense of healing while we're carrying the burden of that terror, right? The burden of white terrorism and white pain and police brutality. You know, we're trying to have that conversation, but where can it be sustained? It can be sustained in the schools. It can be sustained when you teach the children from kindergarten about race and racism and raciality, about the evolution of the term race and what that means, the construct of racism,
Mhm.
because those children are mixed blood too. When I give my talks to middle schools and high schools, generally I ask, I'm not, sorry, not generally, I always ask, how many of you think that you are mixed blood? and they were like, what does that mean? How many of you have more than one parent, or rather, a parent who is a different race from your other parent?
Mm-hmm.
How many of you know your heritage or where your people came from?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, when one of my talks in Indiana, I remember this kid, he was like, well, we're Viking, and then I'm like, yay, I'm so glad who your people were. And,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
another one was like, well, my mom is Hawaiian, my dad is Black, or my mom is Japanese, my dad is white. And so I'm like, so we're mixed. So we are mixed blood. We have more
Mm-hmm.
in common than we
Mm-hmm.
have apart. So
Mm-hmm.
children can start to have these conversations
Mm-hmm.
early in a way that they can disempower the sense of being ostracized because you're light skinned Black, or ostracized because you have different shaped features as an Asian person who has an African American parent, right? It's just like, we're the same, we just happen to have a different kind of parentage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start
Mm-hmm.
with the kindergarten or preschool, move it to first and second and third grade. This should be policy. We should rewrite these books. And shame on Texas. Shame on Texas, because Texas several years ago created a platform, and I don't know who, and I haven't researched actually the person or the people or the district in charge of this, but they took the word slavery and enslavement out of their history books and they called it migration. And they said that Black people migrated from Africa to the Americas. And
No.
yes, you can
How could that
Google this.
possibly?
Exactly.
That makes no sense.
And here's the power of language. And here's the power of the victors who write the history and write the history books, right? Do you know the saying, Elizabeth, the true history, until the lion can speak, the true history of Africa will never be told.
Mm. Oh my gosh, that gives me chills. Well, this reminds me of the Bible, and this is a very different topic, but men wrote the Bible,
Mhm.
and the way women are portrayed or even invisible in the Bible is infuriating. It's the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
thing.
It
So,
definitely is the same thing. I mean, we've got Naomi, we've got Hester, we've got Hathor. I'm sorry, not Hathor, Hagar. I'm going to ancient antiquity with Hathor, Egyptian antiquity.
I love it.
Hagar, we've got Sarah. So we've got some of their stories, but a lot of their stories are built on top of how reproductively virile are you? So, right? So it's like, and she gave him sons, and right. So this is what it means to be mindful and to challenge a narrative. And I'm happy that my memoir Black Indian was included. This is something I'm super proud of. PBS NewsHour included my memoir as one of the top 20 books to read to talk about institutional racism.
Wow, Shonda. Wow. Where can people get your book?
You can get it, of course, off of Amazon. You can go to Wayne State University Press's page, and there's a link to the independent bookstores there. I'm also speaking at the James Rivers Writers Conference, October 8th through the 10th. I'm doing 2 panels. I'm doing a poetry reading and a memoir workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lovely independent bookstore page. So if you want to go on the James Rivers Writers Conference
Mm,
and join the conference, and then you
okay.
can also click on there. You don't have to join the conference to buy my book from the website there,
Okay.
but yeah, that's where
Is it
people can reach me.
is that
Buy the book.
virtual? Okay, good. I'll put the links in the description box so everybody can get your book. Is the event virtual?
Yes.
Okay, okay. Shonda, I really would like to ask you, what special role do people of mixed race play in cultivating human harmony?
I believe, and I know, and I feel in my bones that mixed race people have I don't want to call it a responsibility, but we have the ability, I'll call it that. We have the ability and the capacity to show what it means to forgive. And
Mhm.
I say that because as a quote unquote light skinned Black person, um, could all my life, I'll speak on for myself, all my life, I have had this, what are you? And that has challenged my sense of self. I was like, I'm Velma's daughter. I'm my dad's daughter. I'm a kid,
Mhm.
and so sometimes it'd be an innocent question, what are you? And then other times it would be this like a sense of, you're not like us. And
Oh.
so we have that capacity to show forgiveness for the people who ostracize us. We also have,
Mm.
you know what I mean? So
Yes.
so I think about that a lot, um, because we have to forgive ourselves, sometimes for that self-hatred, and I'm just straight up, there are times when, as a child or as a young person, and you're looking at your face and your body and you're like, why isn't what I come with acceptable to the people around me? Or why is my physicality challenged? And then as we get older, as light-skinned women, why am I sexualized as a Black woman in America because I've got light skin and long hair? And right, so there's a sense of this, for us, forgiveness of, them, forgiveness of the sense of, what you think I am, and then
Mhm.
also turn that into a sense of, but let me educate you.
Mm.
But now that you know that I don't have any animosity, as long as you don't come to me with any like other silliness. But let me educate you on the history of mixed blood people in this country.
Mhm.
We have that capacity to
Mhm.
educate people as well, to say, not only and educate ourselves, but to educate other folks and say, oh, so this is what it meant in the 1900s to be a mixed blood person, and
Mhm.
this is the evolution of the relabeling of a race, a person who could be full-blood Indian, who had African ancestry. So that person could have been Indian, or the person, depending on the time, could just discount their Indianism, their Indianness, and then become a Negro, right? Or not even Indian or Negro, but then suddenly you're mulatto. What's a mulatto? That's a borrowed Spanish word. And then they start to think about the different, they call it the drops of blood, right? So the octoroon, the
Right.
quadroon,
Mhm.
so at any rate, I mean, so all of that sense of relabeling, we get to kind of educate the people,
Mhm.
and I really think too, if I'm thinking about it, right now for myself, it's a sense of compassion. I think that we as mixed blood people are able to show ourselves and show each other the sense of compassion, and hopefully that radiates, you know?
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, as a mixed race woman, I
Yeah.
believe that we bring families together because oftentimes there are families that have these barriers,
Yeah.
sometimes through no fault of their own. It's just a lack of exposure.
Yeah.
And then the families come together, whether it's, um, and then they come together in love and harmony, and it's a learning experience for
I love
everybody and a
that.
healing experience.
I love that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
I see it all
agree. I
the time.
really agree.
Mhm. Yeah, it happened in my family when my parents married. And so, Shonda,
Yeah.
up until 1967, it was
Mhm.
illegal in 16 states for white and Black people to marry. Were there ever any rules or
Mm.
stigmas restricting Black and Indian people from marrying?
Absolutely. So if you, in my book, I talk about, in my memoir, Black Indian, I talk about Walter Plecker. Walter Plecker was, I didn't even know who he was until a full-blood American Indian woman gave a presentation at an American Indian women's conference that I went to in Virginia.
Mhm.
She laid out what Walter Plecker did to erase Indians and then to erase Black people from the public language, right? Here we go back again to the sense of languaging. So in 1924, and he had been working towards this, he became the first Virginia magistrate, director of a Bureau of Vital Statistics in Virginia, right? When it first formed. He went in and changed birth certificates. He instructed his people who worked for him. If anyone said that they were Indian or Negro, make them Black, make them Negro. If anyone said they had mixed parentage, they become Negro, they become Black. If anyone says they're white and Indian, they become full blood Indian. So Walter Pleckert was a white supremacist. He was a white supremacist who borrowed and actually wrote to one of Hitler's higher ups to say, what are you doing about the Jewish problem? Because we would love to do something about our Indian and our Black problem. So in 1924, they instilled the Racial Integrity Act, which meant that anyone who was not white became colored. And that's where the term colored came from, right? Not just because they were Negro or Black or Indian and, American Indian, but it was like, you know what? That's too much. Everybody's colored. And American Indian tribes were erased. Can you imagine that? I mean,
No.
just the sense of they had their own oral history. Some of them had records or census records by people who came and wrote about them. Rather, census records, and then also books by people who came and wrote about their tribes and wrote about their nations and wrote about discovering them in the backwoods of the Virginia swamplands.
Mm.
But with the Racial Integrity Act, it was like with a stroke of pen, you just wiped out those nations. And if you could wipe out those nations, you could take their land.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, seriously. So, I mean, that was probably one of the most devastating re-racializations that happened to people of color in this country. And that's not taught in my history books. That's not in my, I didn't
No.
learn that in high school or
Oh my
college.
gosh, don't get me started. When I was at University of Michigan, I was an English major, but I took a lot of African American studies classes,
Mhm.
which were electives. So look,
Yep.
most people don't even go to college, and you're in college, you might not take these electives. So you never learn this. When
Yes.
I read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn,
Mm-hmm.
Shonda, I
Mm-hmm.
was explosive with anger
Yep.
because I learned the truth about the
Yep.
slaughter of Native Americans. I
Yes.
learned the truth about the vast numbers of Black people who were lynched. I
Yes.
learned the truth about all these things, and I wanted everyone to understand it. And that was decades ago. And
Yep.
now people are just now
Just
really,
now.
oh my, about the truth,
The
and how we
atrocities. Yes. Yep.
and how we're holding those ancestral wounds in us, and we have to heal the
Absolutely.
collective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really love how you said holding those ancestral wounds, because those ancestral wounds include um, darker skinned Indians being put off the reservation or being unable to claim their Indianness, right? So I'm a darker skinned Indian, that's, um, a sense of just kind of like splitting families apart, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so a part of what I do is, I claim my American Indian ancestry, my Kahari, my Eastern Band Cherokee, my Choctaw, my oral history, and my researched history. I claim that because I want other Black Indians and other mixed bloods to know your ancestors give you that right. Your ancestors empower you with the sense of, I get to claim who they were. I
Mm-hmm.
get to claim my full blood 7 generation back,
Mm-hmm.
Delaware Cherokee, ancestors. I get to claim them. And I get to celebrate and honor them. And that's what it's for,
Mm-hmm.
healing those ancestral wounds. I love that you said that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's real. It's real. And we all feel it. And that's that only like they're there. We have them. And so when something like the George Floyd murder occurs, not
Mm-hmm.
only are we coping with the immediacy of this
Yeah.
incredibly terrible thing, but it also rouses all of that
Yeah.
pain from
Yeah.
centuries past.
Yeah, yeah. And it does. I have to say, so I last year towards the July to maybe about April, I was working for this really wonderful outlet, a media outlet, a Black media outlet called Push Black.
Mm-hmm.
And I was researching tons of hidden stories of African Americans in this country and what had happened to them. And somehow I just kept gravitating towards the lynching stories, right? Because we will see pictures, but we don't know who they were. And I gravitated towards this, like the telling of those stories, right? And the naming of the people. And I found one woman, and a traumatic terrible, horrific story, Mary Turner. Mary Turner was lynched in May 19th, 1918, which is, oh, what, 103 or 104 years from the week that George Floyd was,
Oh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the quote unquote anniversary is, we're talking about George Floyd, but there's a trajectory right back to Mary Turner. And she was lynched because she tried to defend herself against a white mob. And she was pregnant, and they cut the baby out of her body. And it was just again, horrific story. And at some point, I want to do something to tell the story of Mary Turner, but her family actually has a project where they want to they want to never forget what happened to her, so that we can face history, right? And we can change and we can heal from what happened to Mary Turner, but then to all the other people who were lynched and murdered during Red Summer, as they call that. This is like 1918, 1919. Many things happen. So, I really believe, and I think, and I was thinking about this too. Why haven't we, as a collective country, learned the principle, which is an African principle? So I'm answering my own question, but the principle of Sankofa, right? Which is a West African principle. The Sankofa means you need to know your past so you don't repeat it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Look to history for your lessons so you don't
Mm-hmm.
repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have come so far as Black people in this country, as mixed bloods,
Mm-hmm.
as biracial and triracial people in this country. But history is still repeating itself when it comes to the policing of our bodies and the degradation and the harming of our bodies. Why is that? Why is that something that we cannot, as a country, eh, include in the infrastructures of, and I said education earlier, but police departments, corporate America, uh, healthcare? Why is it that we are still the highest rate of high blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes, AIDS, HIV? Why is this? And my conspiracy theory people will say there's still a war on our bodies. There's still a war on Black people in America. I take it back to Malcolm X. We just celebrated his birthday on the 19th, May 19th, in fact. May 19th, I believe. I'm looking at my dates, and I'm going to go, I'll double check Malcolm X's birthday. But Malcolm X would always say the white people are afraid of us because of the melanin. They're afraid because we have a transgressive gene as opposed to a recessive gene.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's like, well, okay, I understand that sense of anatomy, or the physiology, but we have to live together. So
Mm-hmm.
how can we do this in a way that creates harmony and creates that sense of healing in every infrastructure, every facet of our country? And that's a book that I'm working on. I'm working on a couple of things.
Oh, good. I can't wait to
Yeah.
read that because we need it. I mean, the attacks on Asian people, the attacks on
Yes.
Jewish people.
Yes.
I'm incapable of comprehending
Yeah.
hate.
Yeah.
Just like the
I
Jewish
know.
man in Manhattan who was attacked. He said he
Yep.
can't understand it. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
We're all the same. We all want the same things.
Yeah.
Wellness, love, peace for our
Right.
families.
Right. Right.
What? What is the big deal?
Yeah. It's the perpetuation. It's the perpetuation of hate. It's the perpetuation of otherism, the perpetuation of difference, right? Um, and because of that, we are so connected. Our present minds and our present bodies are so connected to the past. And we have to deal with the past as a country. We
Mhm.
have to deal with it.
Mhm. Well, I think the more people like you, Shonda Buchanan, and me, and all of us playing our role as peacemakers, as
Mm-hmm.
educators,
Mm-hmm.
as people inspiring dialogue that causes change and
Yes.
inspiration and enlightenment. See,
Yes.
there's a word.
I
See
like
that
that.
word? Oh, you
I
like that?
actually say endarkenment.
Endarkenment. Okay, I love it. Your languaging is just so powerful. So,
You know, because, yeah, like when black cats cross my path, I'm like, thank you, black cat.
yes, yes,
You
yes.
know?
Endarkenment. See, even I just said that word because of the association with
Mhm.
spirit and, you know, understanding and love and peace.
Mhm.
So thank you. We all have work to do on the way we language
Yeah,
around
yeah,
all
of
of these
course,
issues.
of course,
Beautiful.
of course. I love this.
I know this is such a great conversation. Oh my gosh.
Love this.
I immensely appreciate your
Thank
insights,
you.
Shonda, and I wish you the absolute best with everything. What
Thank
would
you.
you like to say to conclude this conversation?
Yeah, gosh. So, so many things. Wouldn't it be lovely to have a sense of conclusion to racism? It's like racism is done.
Wow!
Wouldn't that be great? It's like it stopped yesterday.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
that's so old. Racism is so over. But I think to conclude this part of my life as a writer, as a researcher, as a literary activist,
Mhm,
is to say that we all have the power to confront the issues that people of color are facing in our country. We all have a responsibility. Actually, I
mhm,
tell my students this as well. Even if it's hard to have a discussion with a racist parent or a racist grandparent, you have to try. If you yourself are an ally and you consider yourself an ally, even if it's painful, you've got to confront that within you, because Black people are tired of fighting for our rights with
mhm,
white people. We
mhm,
shouldn't
mhm,
have to do that work by ourselves
mhm,
if we have a democracy, if we have our allies. This is something that any person who considers themselves someone who celebrates diversity, inclusivity, equity,
mhm,
we should be doing this. We should be doing this. A
mhm.
capitalist, you know, if you getting all that money, where can you funnel money into programs that enrich our communities and that
Mm,
put us on an equal playing field, right?
mhm,
And however you can do that, Wall Street, how can you funnel some money into programs that give us back to ourselves and
ooh,
that celebrate our families and that
mm,
keep our families together? All right.
mhm,
And so to, I'll conclude with that sense of it, but I'm definitely working on something, a book idea and a project for two things actually, the relanguaging piece,
mhm,
and then I'm also working on a book, which I'm entitling after a poem of mine called Black Woman Down.
mm,
And I want to tell the stories of 100 Black women in history. So Sarah Bartman, who was, Venus Hottentot,
oh yeah,
Mary Turner, Mary
mm,
Turner. I want to tell her story.
mhm,
I want to unearth these stories of the Aunt Jemima, who was, Hattie Green, and I want to unearth their stories so we can put their stories into our public narrative, right? Not
mhm,
just history books or online searches, but I want to make it a textbook. The stories of 100 Black women, Black Woman Down, what happened to them, how can we talk about them? What is an essay or a poem written about them? And how can we discuss this essay or poem about them? So
mm,
that's a book that I'm working on right now.
mm,
Um, and I guess a part of it, we say educating people about us, but it's really because, forgive me, everyone, Black women rule the world. Like the world spins on what we do, it spins on our derriere. So educating ourselves about the Black woman's role in this country will also educate everyone about themselves and their role.
mhm. Oh,
I'll
I
stop
can't
there.
wait to read those. Oh
I'll
my
stop
goodness.
there.
That's brilliant. Those stories are phenomenal. The Hottentot Venus is just so fascinating, but the way she was
Yes.
put on spectacle in Europe
Yes.
was again another atrocity. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
wow, Shonda, that's really innovative.
That's
I'm looking forward to reading that book and the
thank
languaging.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate that. The other project that I did complete was a book of poetry about Nina Simone.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and so I submitted that to contests. I'm waiting to hear back to see if I, got, won any contests. And then if I don't win any, I'll start to submit to publishers. But I'm exploring the life of Nina Simone as a
Mhm.
mixed blood person,
Mhm.
because even though she was this beautiful, patina, dark, dark, beautiful woman, she claimed her American Indian ancestors and ancestry.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
can, and actually that's on the first page of her autobiography, I Put a Spell on You. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so
Fascinating.
there's a lot happening with me as a writer and as
Well,
a professor as well.
I love how you say literary activist.
Yeah, yeah,
That's powerful, and
yeah.
that really is the power of the written word is infinite.
Yeah. So I use language as a tool for resilience, right? I
Mhm.
use language as a tool for survival,
Mhm.
as a tool to disempower those who would create some kind of a label that could take away my power, and to empower myself, right? And I use language as a weapon, and Toni Morrison, Sonia Sanchez, let me call them out, Alice Walker, Lucille Clifton, Edwidge Danticat, my gosh, so many, Gail Jones, Intozaki Shange. There's so many African American women writers who have done what I am doing, but who have also said to me verbally and who have written, it is our job as a writer to confront and to change and to transform our lives with language. We can't sit back, right? We can't just sit back and just write about flowers. I love flowers and I do write about flowers, but we have to talk about, Toni Morrison says, that is the time when you stand up and you fight with language.
Mm, I must bring Zora Neale Hurston,
Zora Neale Hurston,
Maya
yes.
Angelou into the
Maya,
space. Two of
call
my
them.
most beloved.
Gloria Naylor,
Oh, yes.
call, we have to call them in, call them in.
Mm,
Octavia Butler.
mhm. I mean, we could sit here till
We can
midnight.
sit here just just talking and talking and talking and talking, and some of them will be in my book, The 100 Black Women, as well, but I'm talking about them from a different capacity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, women writers, Black women writers, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
in my meditation practice, I've often gotten messages from
Mm.
women writers from all over who didn't have the power, Shonda, the
Yeah.
power and the freedom to do what we do as
Yep.
writers, women of
Yes.
color who have the power and freedom to write whatever we want.
Yeah.
And so it's our in the messaging in this from spirit is that we have this responsibility, this obligation with this freedom that they didn't
Yes.
have. We must speak and we must be loud about it.
Yes. Yes. We must. We have to. It is. So there is a thing that we do in our communities, permission to speak. So we ask. I have to ask the elder in the room permission to speak. And I realize now that I'm the elder. I don't have to ask permission anymore. I'm 52,
Oh, wow.
right? And so
Uh-huh.
now it is my time. It's my responsibility, to pick up
Mhm.
that mantle and to say, okay, this is what they did, for me as a Black woman in this country. And now I have to do this for the rest of my sisters coming
Mhm.
up.
Yes, 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 yes. Oh
You
my
know,
goodness.
we have to.
We do. We
We,
do.
Elizabeth, with your amazing show. I love
Oh.
that I'm on The Goddess with the full title. This
Uh,
is when I saw it, I was like, Boss Goddess, yes.
our theme is boss up, goddess.
Boss
So,
up, Goddess.
so what does it mean to you to boss up, goddess?
Everything that I just said. It definitely means to use language as a tool to fight racial racial injustice, Use language as a tool to confront it anywhere I see it in a polite way, sometimes, and then not in a not so polite way, in other
Mhm.
times. But to definitely use my craft as the sense of, okay, so that's a belief that you have, but let me just write a little bit about this so we can kind of maybe think about why that belief might impact me
Mm.
erroneously, and then would
Mhm.
you consider changing that belief? So,
Mm.
so this is bossing up as a goddess means to use language as that tool.
Oh, I love that so much. Oh my goodness. In my new book, I talk about language, not regarding race, but about
Mm,
women's
yeah.
our rhythm, our tone, our authority or lack
Ooh,
thereof, and
I
how
love
so
that.
important it is to speak with
Mm,
authority and not ask questions or apologize. But it starts
yeah.
with awareness because many
Right.
women are unaware of these dynamics that
Yeah.
we've absorbed and then speak in a way that is
Yeah.
very diminutive and very
Yeah.
diminishing of our power. So,
Absolutely. I tell my students that as well. I say to them, uh, we'll have a conversation about it in regards to an essay that we've read, right?
mhm.
But I'll say, so what are the beliefs that you have about yourself as a woman? And then what are the beliefs that society has about you? And then what are the ones that you believe? And what are the ones that you confront on a daily basis and that you
Mhm.
continually have to change in a
Oh,
boardroom, in a classroom, right?
oh.
And so, yes, I really believe, again, here's that sense of empowering yourself with, I am a woman and a Black woman in America, and I'm a Black Indian woman in America, and I am incredibly grateful and proud to belong to both of those races, ethnicities, nations. So incredibly proud to belong to them, and no one can tell me differently, right?
Oh, that's wonderful. Love that. Love that so much. Wow. Shonda Buchanan, I am so absolutely honored that you joined me here on the Goddess Power Show to
Thank
share
you.
your wisdom and your insights
Thank
and
you.
this guidance that we can all apply to make the world a better place.
Thank
And
you. Yeah, I'm about making it a better place for sure.
good, good, good. So on this day, as we
Yeah.
commemorate the life of George Floyd and all that has occurred since his tragic
Yeah.
murder, we have these conversations, we have this
Mm.
responsibility, we have
Hmm.
this mission. And so I wish you absolute success in
Hmm.
carrying on that mission.
Thank you so much. And I take that, and I wish you success and honor as well. And if I have any young people who are watching this, please contact me if you want to talk about writing and how you too can be a literary activist.
Ooh, perfect. Thank you. And all of her information will be in the description box so you can contact Shonda Buchanan and also learn about her book and
Mhm.
also the events that she has coming up. So thank
Thank
you
you.
again,
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I had a fantastic time. Thank you.
Shonda. Good. We took an hour. It's typically 30 minutes, but I feel like we could talk for 5 more hours if
I
we let
agree.
ourselves.
I agree.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, all of you, for joining us here on the Goddess Power Show. I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and I interview trailblazing women like Shonda Buchanan who help us all live bigger, better, and bolder when they show us how to boss up
Mm.
because they share their wisdom on what it means to be an empowered woman. So please do give us a thumbs up for the show. Please subscribe to the channel. That will help more people see this wonderful interview. And please also click the notifications bell
Mm.
so you'll know every time we go live or upload a new video. Please also follow me on Twitter. And if you'd like to be a literary activist, you can join my Write the Change book coaching program.
Mm.
Write the Change, because if the past year's events have inspired ideas in you that you'd like to share on the
Mm.
pages of a book that will last forever and touch lives around the world, I can help you do that. So please go to twosisterswriting.com, learn more. I'd love to help you write the change you wish to see in yourself and the world. I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and I want you to remember Boss up, goddess. You have the power. I'll see you next time.